I think people in grade 9 do cocaine.
One of my friends do drugs.
I've seen a couple of people high in our class.
I know a couple of people that do drugs.
Prescription drugs.
Weed and crack and stuff.
Pain medication, like addicted on it.
Marijuana and cocaine and everything.
People are naive to think that it's probably not young people or it's probably a certain demographic that are using these drugs. But for us, what we have seen is that it can be any age. So it can be somebody that's in their 50s and maybe somebody as young as in their pre-teens.
I'd say the more softcore drugs like hash and that sort of stuff, weed, you see kids are 13 now smoking that stuff, and then at that end, right, and then the other side, it's right up through to adults. So it's very broad based as well. So we see it in a lot of adults, kids. It seems to be with everyone.
When I started seeing people use IV drugs in particular, and being injection drug users, we would see that more for people kind of in their early to mid 20s, kind of in that phase, whereas now it's not unusual for us to hear of older teenagers having an addiction to an IV drug.
Certainly everybody is aware of the high use of OxyContin with people, in the city and across the province. And unfortunately, you certainly see an increase in people that become IV drug users and I guess shooting up, for lack of a better phrase, and which is certainly very worrisome.
It's a little bit of a cycle. So if a young person, for example, could not afford to buy drugs and then has to turn to crime or to dealing to be able to sell drugs to get the money to do drugs, and then they get into a terrible cycle where that lifestyle in and of itself can be very traumatic. It can be violent. They can see other young people exploited or be exploited themselves.
When people end up getting bullied, I think they end up doing drugs.
Just to fit in, be cool.
Drink away all their problems.
To look popular.
Maybe because it makes them feel better. Well, I was really sad and then I hit depression.
Maybe there's something going on at their home.
I'm like really depressed.
When we look at hardcore addictions, so people who are using drugs to function in their daily life, they can no longer maybe go to school or go to work. Those are folks who have some underlying issues that are leading to drugs.
Oftentimes, it can result from somebody who's probably lived a troubled life and maybe not a lot of family support. I'm really generalising and saying this because I truly believe it can come from any background, that your life can end up down that road. You can come from the most supportive family and still end up making those choices.
When we see significant addiction, what we're seeing is actually significant emotional pain, and people are using drugs to numb what's going on inside. And so we have young people who've experienced a whole range of things in their childhood, and sometimes it can be that they had what we maybe classify as something as developmental and complex trauma. So they're young people who suffered neglect as children, who didn't have the nurturing that they needed when they were younger.
There's a lot of stresses in the home that are happening. There's a lot of things going on in their lives, and I think this becomes a bit of an out for them, a bit of a self-medicating piece, and it goes around in the circle, and it seems to play around. So that's what we're finding is probably some of the big underlying pieces, and then your typical stuff too, like peer pressure and some of the other stresses and pressures that the kids are under, and people in general, I think, in our society. So,
but I often think that it's it's like layers of an onion, so to speak, that I think it's oftentimes not one reason that brought you to that decision in your life. If you really sit down and speak with somebody, I think if they truly share with you all of the reasons that they can verbalise and identify with, it can often be many, many, many layers that brought them to that point in their lives.
But what happens is when young people have a certain level of pain that they're having struggles to deal with, is that the use of drugs or alcohol allows them to numb that and to feel like for a brief period of time, I can cope with what is hurting me. And it becomes a long-term strategy because those underlying issues have not been addressed.
These people, you gotta find out the reason why they do such a thing.
Make them your friend. They look sad, try to find out what's wrong and try to help them.
Pick up for them when they're getting bullied.
Make friends and stuff.
I will still hang around with them so that they can have someone to talk to.
I think, again, some of it comes from our own personal values and beliefs, and that it's not always, somebody being addicted doesn't fit a certain criteria or doesn't have a particular look, as you might think. And as we know, generally in society, you could be working next to somebody who may be struggling with an alcohol addiction, but they may be able to pull it off and go to work every day, and then it may be very hidden, whereas people have a certain picture of somebody who's addicted to drugs.
Sometimes there's supports out there, and in a lot of cases there's, but it's fragmented. So I think that we see kids come here to the centre, we see they're in school and home, and I think we got to have a better collaborative approach in the community. We need to be working with the schools better, schools with us, helping the families themselves deal with some of the pressures that they as parents are dealing with.
So I think as a society we need to open our eyes a bit more to where addiction is and to always be there to support people. I think that if somebody feels that they're going to be judged if they come forward to ask for help or support or just to identify with themselves to say, you know what, I'm struggling with this and I need some help, but they need to know that they have a trusting person to go to and that they won't be judged.
So I think that we as a community got to do a bit more work in pulling people together and pulling groups together who are dealing with the addictions piece and try to help people find some ways and means to kick that habit for sure. But there's, again, not enough, I feel, collaborative approaches going on within the community to deal with that kid. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child, and this is where we have to do that kind of work as well.
But as a community, I think just broadening our understanding of what leads to substance use and then looking at how do we further support people through that instead of isolating people through that is important. Drug addicts are not bad people. Drug addicts are people in pain.